February 9th, 2022. This is one of the most memorable days for those who have been invested in the Mario Kart community. At the start of 2022, rumors started popping up about a new Mario Kart project in development. Many of us were cautiously optimistic, as I and many others were pretty burnt out on Mario Kart 8. In my case, I got Mario Kart 8 in a Wii U bundle for Christmas in 2015 and proceeded to double dip with 8 Deluxe when I got my Switch. It's safe to say that most of the community was aching for something new that wasn't a mobile game with an, at the time, inconsistent new content schedule, or an RC toy with a camera strapped on top. When a Nintendo Direct was announced for February 9th, it felt like it could finally be the time we get something new for the series. Well,
here we go.
What did you think?
What's up? What's
Here's
coming?
some news from Mario Kart fans.
So yeah, not only were we finally getting new content for 8 Deluxe after 5 years, but they were planning to double the tracks in the game. Not to mention that, even though these are remasters, tour tracks were going to be included, which would not only functionally be new tracks to more console-oriented players, but would also preserve these tracks in a game without a bi-weekly rotation schedule. Now off the top, I do need to say that during the month or so that followed between the announcement and release of Wave 1, the news started losing its luster a little. People were quick to notice that these tracks were all being ported from Tour, even down to the art style. Even the tracks that had not released in Tour at the time shared this art style. The biggest issue for many was the noticeably lower amount of detail in these tracks compared to the base game. If you compare side by side, you can tell there was definitely an extent where the texturing and lighting was upgraded a little from Tour, but it still felt very jarring compared to the rest of 8 Deluxe. Even so, I and presumably many others were just happy to finally be getting more console Mario Kart content. At the end of the day, I know I held the sentiment that these are still new tracks to play on top of an already massive game, which was very exciting. It also felt reasonable to assume that the tracks were only going to get better from here, especially since a lot of the Wave 1 tracks got glow-ups between the original trailer and the final release. Onto the tracks themselves though. For the final time, let's start with the city tracks. Onto the tracks themselves though. For the final time, or the first time if you're watching the series in the Wave order, let's start with the city tracks. Now I won't sugarcoat it, this is easily the weakest selection of cities in the entire pass. Paris Promenade and Tokyo Blur are both city tracks that released towards the start of Tour's lifespan, being the third and second release in that game respectively. With that being the case, these are easily the two simplest city tracks, with the only other one that contends on the same level as them being Tour's first city track, New York Minute. Now look, mid does not equal bad. If they were going to choose two city tracks for the first wave, these are arguably the best choices because of their simplicity. Paris Promenade, being the first track of the entire Booster Course Pass, is the perfect introduction to city tracks. This is the only city track that follows largely the same route, with the only big change-up being on lap 3 where you take a side route that takes you through the course in reverse. The base layout is simple but has room for intrigue with a few key areas of split paths from the different Paris variants from Tour. This rendition of Paris does a great job at showing that city tracks are going to be their own unique thing. For Tour fans, it sets the expectation that all variants of each city will be incorporated into their 8 Deluxe counterparts. For everyone else, it introduces the concept of the arrows that can change the routing on each lap. It also sets the expectation that there can be overlapping parts of the track where you can run into racers at other points, similar to GameCube's Luigi Circuit. If we want to consider this to be the quote-unquote starter track of the Booster Course Pass, I think it does a superb job at setting expectations while still being a fun experience on its own. It may be mid, but it's still good stuff. Tokyo Blur, on the other hand, tends to rank pretty low for most people, and I am inclined to agree. It is for decently good reason, though. The way I see Mario Kart Tour and 8 Deluxe, New York and Paris, depending on the game we're talking about, is the equivalent of the traditional starter track. Tokyo, on the other hand, is the city track equivalent of a Mario circuit in both games, albeit maybe a little bit simpler in its layout than the typical Mario circuit. It's a daytime track with a simple layout, and even the music is very circuit-like, with the motif from the 3DS circuit theme being a major part of it. Judging it from that perspective, it's still a pretty neat track, but unfortunately Mario circuits tend to be some of the weaker tracks in their respective games, and this is no exception. A track based on Tokyo could have been much more compelling than this, which is a sentiment I hold for a lot of the early city tracks. It could be easy to point out the minimap as an example of this, but to be honest, that's fine. Plenty of great tracks have very simple layouts. Just look at Toad's Factory or even Moonview Highway. The difference between this and those, though, is that those tracks have interesting mechanics and/or set pieces to complement their layouts. Tokyo Blur is literally just road the entire time, with a singular grass shortcut you can take on only the first 2 laps. Why not have a major building or 2 to drive through? Heck, we see interesting stuff in the background like a plane taking off. Why not have a brief section going through Haneda Airport just to go with it? Just anything to make the track a bit more compelling. Like I said, Tokyo is essentially the city track equivalent of a Mario circuit, so I can understand some of the simplicity, but I think I am more than justified too in saying that any city track that is this simple just kinda does a disservice to representing that city. If you're building a city track purely around roads, you are making a circuit track that just happens to have some landmarks and theming from a city. You aren't exactly justifying basing a track around that city at that point. Thankfully, city tracks only get better from here, but that does unfortunately mean Tokyo just kind of blended in more and more as more waves came out. Are we really surprised though? Now we can move on to the retros. Wave 1 had a very mixed bag. In a general sense, there were some neat inclusions here, but you could definitely tell they were trying to keep the first wave simple. There's no greater example of this than 3DS Toad Circuit. Now look, I get it. Toad Circuit is one of the better starter tracks in the series. The 3DS circuit theme is iconic, especially since they've used a motif from it in multiple other track themes. And considering the Booster Course Pass is made to preserve tour content, it more than makes sense that they would include the track that everyone plays first in tours since it is used for the tutorial in that game. That said, it is kinda understandable why so many people weren't too huge on this inclusion. Like I said, it's a starter course, so naturally it is super basic both structurally and thematically. That wouldn't be so bad if it wasn't for the fact that it is the 50th track in this game. Literally the only way Toad Circuit sticks out in this game, even when it launched, is in a negative light. That's not to mention this is one of the biggest examples of the Wave 1 graphic complaints. It doesn't bother me too much, but comparing this track to anything in the base game, and you can tell they did not put much work into retexturing it. Now, if we want to make a huge reach, we could say that maybe this was done to more closely emulate Tour's art style, but if that's the case, then I feel like Wave 1 in general would have been given a little bit more texture work. Not to mention, I feel like if they were to go for something like that, why not do it in an actual Tour track? Honestly, I just don't think Nintendo cared as much about this track either and just wanted to get it ready to go as quickly as possible. All of this said, Toad Circuit isn't even bad for real. It's just a victim of circumstances. The layout is still really fun to race on despite its simplicity, and depending on your speed class, there's a fun cut you can potentially do shroomless if you hop at the right time. The tow balloons are also a fun detail for the track that give it a little bit more of an identity compared to other starter tracks. There's also an outstanding music track, but I want to talk about that more in detail later. For now, let's move on to another controversial track, being GBA Sky Garden. Now this is slotted in a spot that, looking at other waves, is typically reserved for fan favorite tracks. And yeah, Sky Garden is absolutely one of the biggest fan favorites from Super Circuit. So giving it the Mario Kart 8 GBA remake treatment sounds like a surefire success, right? Right? Well, let's just look at the layout. So yeah, if you compare the minimap for this version and the original, it is glaringly obvious that Sky Garden was majorly simplified. It isn't uncommon for Tor to simplify its GBA remake some, but Sky Garden is easily the worst example of this. It legitimately got simplified beyond recognition, and that is not even an exaggeration. Needless to say, this didn't sit well with most people, myself included. It was definitely a disappointment because everything else here actually rocks. I love the track progressively getting higher and higher, building up to a nice big lighting section at the end. I think they did a great job with the aesthetics too. The moving texture on the clouds adds some nice movement to the environment. The beanstalks from the original are still here, with one even making a Sweet Sweet Canyon style shortcut at the very end. I like how on some turns there are actually potted flowers, which I think adds even more to the garden theming. Not to mention the stellar, as always, music. They definitely had the pieces to make something special here, and it only makes it so much more unfortunate that they butchered the layout as hard as they did. They turned what could have been a love letter to the original version into Crowd Top Cruise Light. This isn't even to say this is a bad track in 8 Deluxe by any means, but when you are told you are getting Sky Garden and get Borderline a different track entirely, it's hard not to be at least a little bit disappointed. For the sake of preserving the Tor version, it's nice to have it here, but I hope they give Sky Garden another chance in the future to get an overhaul like this that can be a little bit more faithful to the original layout. On the other side of things, our next track is one that got a big overhaul that actually improves on the original in many ways. For one, Choco Mountain is no longer as enclosed as it used to be. They broke down some of the walls and made it actually feel like you're on top of a mountain. Also, the cave is extended to include more of the track, specifically the next couple turns after where this section originally ended, adding even more aesthetic variety and even bringing in a new shortcut. After the cave, the straightaway here is now a gliding section, which again turns focus to the elevation and adds more variety to the track in both gameplay and aesthetic ways. The boulder section plays it straight, but to be honest, this section didn't really need to change anyway. I do like the addition of the fish bones in the walls just to add a little more atmosphere here. The biggest deal though is that Choco Mountain is finally in a console game with a tricking system. Finally, we can trick off those bumps at the end. I should also add that the Wave 1 graphics kind of work in its favor, since it actually makes the mountain feel like it's made out of chocolate instead of just dark brown dirt. Really, this may be the only Wave 1 retro without any kind of controversy, and I get it. It feels like they really put a lot into this one, and the areas where it may have fallen behind if it was another track actually work in its favor here. Choco Mountain is a track I always was just kind of neutral on, but this is a version that actually makes me inclined to pick it every now and then, and considering it's Choco Mountain I'm talking about, that's just about the biggest compliment I can give it. Now, when we're discussing each wave, there tends to be a certain past game you can attribute most of the retros to. Wave 6, for instance, favors Wii, having 2 Wii Nitro tracks as well as DK Mountain, which appeared as a retro in Wii. Wave 2, while not directly containing any 3DS tracks, still favors Mario Kart 7 since Calamari Desert, Waluigi Pinball, and Mushroom Gorge all appeared in that game. Wave 1, on the other hand, is the only wave in the entire past that leans more towards DS. Choco Mountain and Sky Garden are here, both of which appeared as retros in DS. But what about a DS Nitro? Shroom Ridge is a bit of a sleeper course that I am extremely happy to have seen get some attention in the modern day. Going back years now, I'd been hoping to see it as a retro in Mario Kart 9, so when the Booster Course Pass was announced and Shroom Ridge was a part of the first wave, I was very excited once the rush of new Mario Kart content being confirmed kinda cooled down. The track retains its original layout, but there's a few shortcuts added which really add a lot to the track. The first is a glider ramp placed in that big grass field about halfway through, which I think is especially cool since fan mods had added a glider ramp here years before this version was announced. I'm not sure if this is actually the case, but I like to imagine these mods may have inspired the developers at Nintendo. Probably not, but it would be really cool if so. The other shortcut I had is during the cliffside section of the track, which is now mostly walled off. While it sucks this was walled off, the gaps in the wall are really cool because there's a very risky mushroom shortcut you can take where you jump out of the gap, get boosted back up by an updraft, and then land back on the road. If you don't aim properly, however, this shortcut is very punishing, taking you back to the area where you jump off. Also, don't even think about attempting it shroomless, because even in 200cc, you will not get enough speed to make it back to the other side, even if you catch the updraft. It is absolutely worth it though when you're able to properly go for it, as this cuts off a pretty decent chunk of the track. The only real complaint I have is that all traffic goes in only one direction now, as opposed to two directions like in DS. But there's a certain extent I chalk this up to the track having to be a bit on the easier side since it is in Wave 1. Considering the twisty layout of the track itself, this was kind of a necessity to make it fit into an easier wave, since some turns can be really brutal on higher engine classes the first few times you play. Despite the slight toning down in difficulty though, this is still a very solid track, and I'm happy to see a lot of the community agreeing on that. I know this is another big standout example of the Wave 1 graphics, and while I definitely see it, it just doesn't bother me too much. I'm honestly just happy this track and its banger music is here. Speaking of tracks I'm happy to see here, oh boy. This genuinely may be one of the most divisive tracks in the past. On one hand, it is Coconut Mall. I don't think there's anything they can do to this track to keep it from being a good time, at least as long as it's still recognizable as Coconut Mall. That said, there are a lot of points of contention I see on this one. The graphics are brought up in more ways than one. Of course, one side of the argument is about the lower amount of texturing, as is standard with Wave 1. The other side is a lot of people just tend to prefer the overall look of the original over this one. Honestly, that's totally fair. This track changed a lot visually, so I understand preferring the original over this version. Personally, I like this style more for the most part. The orange is a fresh coat of paint that I find to be interesting, and I like how vibrant a lot of the sections of the course look now, such as the shop you can take the shortcut through at the start. I also think the U-bends are done significantly better here, being a proper walkway with cool brick murals on the wall as opposed to the boring cheese graters from Wii. I will admit though, compared to the tour version, I feel like the lighting in 8 has a little too much bloom on the track, and in some ways, even though it does generally look better than the tour version, I kinda prefer the coloring on the tour version in some areas. Admittedly though, while details were added, some were lost. The archway in the final jump area is no longer there, which kind of just makes that straightaway feel bland. I also think this could have been a good time to bring back something like the big ball sign hanging from the ceiling in the first main section of the mall, since that was removed in all subsequent versions. Now, I would be pressed not to address the major elephant in the room, which is the parking lot section. This may be the single biggest point of contention among the fan base with this version of the track, so much so that it caused this to be the only track Nintendo actively revised in the next update. Firstly, the Miis are now replaced with Shy Guys. Honestly, this isn't the biggest deal, though I can understand how this kinda loses some charm for some people. The biggest issue though is that originally when Wave 1 dropped, the cars were stationary. Their positions would be randomized each lap, but there would be no on-screen movement beyond that. This especially stung because when this track was added to Tour a couple months later, the cars were back to functioning as they originally did. This is a very baffling decision, especially considering this was a port of that version of the track. It's not like they couldn't get moving obstacles to work, since Shroom Ridge is pretty much completely based around those, so even today I wonder why this decision was made. When Wave 2 dropped though, they revised this section. Now the Shy Guys have set positions. They will occasionally pull forward and back up, albeit at an angle and not very much, but most importantly, they absolutely whip the shit out of those cars now. Like, holy hell, I just know those are some bald-ass tires. Honestly, the pure comedy of Shy Guys doing donuts in the parking lot made this whole ordeal worth it for me. It does make me sad, though, that they never did any other track revisions down the line. There's definitely some that need it, and there's one in particular that I think we all know I'm talking about. All that said, though, I quite enjoy this version of Coconut Mall. I can't exactly firmly assert it as the best version or anything, regardless of whether or not I personally prefer it, but I think it's safe to say any version of this track is going to be a great time, even if you consider it to be one of the weaker versions. At the end of the day, Coconut Mall is Coconut Mall, and that's all it needed to be. Moving on to our last track. We have the first non-city tour nitro to show up in the Booster Course Pass, and holy shit, what a great first impression. Ninja Hideaway, without question, is the standout track of Wave 1. Tour players already knew what a treat this track was for about a year beforehand, and admittedly, I hadn't even heard of it before the Booster Course Pass was announced. I remember watching videos of all the tour nitros to brush up before Wave 1 dropped though, and this one was already surprising me with how much depth and creativity there was. Considering I was only really familiar with the earlier city tracks at the time, as well as Merry Mountain, this was definitely an eye-opener. It pretty much plays here exactly as it does in Tour. Most sections have top and bottom pads, each with their own shortcuts and obstacles. Because of this, you can play this track over and over again and potentially have a completely different experience every time, which I think tends to be a quality that a lot of the best tracks in the series share. Everything about this track makes it stand out immensely among the rest of Wave 1. Most of Wave 1 is set in the daytime, but here it is night. While most of Wave 1 has layouts on the easier side, this one can be very punishing if you aren't familiar with it, as most turns are 90 degrees. When I talked about Tokyo Blur's simplicity not necessarily being a weak point either, Ninja Hideaway is a perfect example of how to do a simple layout correctly. Looking at the minimap, it's basically a rectangle with a dent, right? But within that rectangle, basically every straightaway is different. There's the first one where the upper track is rising and lowering, acting as a hazard for the bottom side. There's a glider section where correct use of the updrafts can help you choose if you're going to land on the top or bottom side. There's the final section where the upper section is only on the right side, creating a narrower path that can have a big payoff if you can nail the ultra shortcut you can take at the end of it. Oh yeah, there's an ultra shortcut. Mario Kart 8 until this point had been very strict as to how far off-road you were allowed to go. Any shortcut that seemed like it would cut off a lot of the track was typically not possible. Now, however, you have crazier shortcuts like this that actually take some practice and can be very high risk, high reward. What's even crazier to me is that the official Nintendo staff ghost uses this cut, which means it was absolutely intentional one way or another, even though it absolutely does not feel like that should be the case. I just want to add that when this track dropped, everyone was confused as to why it didn't have the tour prefix. I myself thought it was just an oversight that would be fixed when Wave 2 dropped, but as it turned out, the lack of a prefix here had bigger implications for the rest of the pass that would be revealed with the next wave. Ninja Hideaway is probably the biggest glimmer of hope Wave 1 had as to how the rest of the Booster Course Pass would play out. It was definitely a strong start for the non-city tour nitros and showed what those tracks could be capable of. It was also the perfect note to end Wave 1 on. It's no secret, especially now, that Wave 1 was essentially the equivalent of a mushroom cup when it came to the overall Booster Course Pass. And it really feels like Ninja Hideaway is there purely to show that, hey, this is not what the entire pass is going to be like. There's some great stuff on the way, and that absolutely ended up being the case. As for the Wave 1 update, there honestly isn't that much to write home about here. Of course, the track selection got updated to have the toggle between the base game and Booster Course Pass tracks, So it was definitely neat to see how they went about doing that. What I really want to talk about though is that this update was kind of the full confirmation that these tracks were going to get similar treatments to the base game tracks. By that I mean stuff like the course icons and the music. Going in, I had been questioning for a little bit whether or not they were still going to be replicating the course thumbnail style that the base game tracks had, especially since it had been so long. I could have easily seen them just putting the promo images that they use for these tracks as the icons and calling it a day, but they didn't. We still maintained the style of it being a screenshot from the track with a certain feature of it getting focus on the side. The thumbnails for this wave are all pretty good too, and are mostly what I would more or less expect from these tracks. Shroom Ridge is my personal favorite of this batch. I really wouldn't be against doing a ranking of them one day if you guys would be into that. Now, more importantly though, as I've pointed out several times throughout the video, is the course music. As I'm sure you all know, basically all of the course themes in Mario Kart 8 were recorded with live instruments. This was especially exciting for the retro tracks since it gave us brand new takes on track themes we already know and love. Going into Wave 1 though, I was somewhat concerned as to how far they were going to go this time. Like I said, it had been years since the last content was released for 8, so it was somewhat reasonable to expect these tracks may not get quite the same treatment. Heck, the only music used in the reveal trailer for the past was Coconut Malls, and that didn't sound very different at all. I do remember people flagging down that it was indeed a new arrangement, but the similarity between this version and the original made me question how in depth they were actually going to go, if at all. It at the very least felt reasonable to assume that the courses that got new arrangement in Tour like Sky Garden were probably just going to use those arrangements, right? Wrong. I distinctly remember the day Wave 1 started rolling out. The update dropped that morning, but the tracks wouldn't be available to the US until that night. I got home from work that afternoon, and while waiting for my friend to come over so we could play the tracks when they dropped, I noticed that a music channel on YouTube had uploaded the Mario Kart 8 versions of these track themes. Huh, I thought. I may as well check these out and see if anything is different. I clicked Paris first, and to be honest, I didn't really hear much difference, though that was because I was less familiar with the theme at the time. Then I clicked on Toad Circuit, and what's this? Significantly higher energy? Live instruments? A bass line? I mean this in the most genuine way possible when I say I was shook. Everything had gotten new arrangements. The tour tracks, the retros, even Sky Garden had an amazing new arrangement that was completely different to the one we got on tour just a few weeks beforehand. And holy shit, when I tell you this wave's music tracks absolutely slapped, I mean it. Shroom Ridge is everything I hoped for from a Mario Kart 8 arrangement, and then some. Tokyo Blur was actually memorable. The music alone made the Booster Course Pass worth it to me. I don't give a shit about the graphics or how simplified some of these tracks may be. I want more music arrangements, and I want them pumped directly into my veins now. I feel like I didn't emphasize this aspect of the Booster Course Pass enough throughout this series, outside of a couple specific instances, but it was genuinely one of the biggest sources of my hype. Like, there were tracks I was hoping to see in the past purely because I wanted to hear the music remix. Again, I would love to make a video in the future going more in depth on this, because I feel like I could talk about this for hours. Speaking about talking for hours, if this is your first BCP retrospective, feel free to check out my talks on all the other waves. This is the final one I'm releasing, so if you're seeing this, I have videos on all 6 waves out as of now. That said, I want to thank everyone again for enjoying this series. These have been among the highest performing videos on my channel to date, and I cannot emphasize enough how grateful I am for this series' success. You guys are amazing, and I hope y'all look forward to the videos I have planned in the future. The Mario Kart content definitely doesn't stop here, so definitely look out for more down the line. I also should note that I wrote this before the Switch 2 was revealed, and I think it is basically guaranteed to be revealed by the time this video drops. So there's a non-zero chance that a new Mario Kart game is announced, or at least teased, within the time frame of the 2 months between me writing and releasing this video. So if that's the case, I absolutely plan on making content around that. Okay, damn, this got dated literally within 24 hours of writing it. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this series. Mario Kart 8, the Booster Course Pass, and even Tour all mean so much to me, and I couldn't wait much longer to talk about them. I definitely couldn't wait to get to them in my cup breaking series, considering I haven't even recorded the Super Circuit video as of the time I'm writing this, or recording, by the way. I have something kinda special for my end edit this time around, so definitely stick around for that. All that said, and for one final time in the series, I'll see you guys next time. Bye! So, Nintendo Direct. I literally just got out of one of my classes like less than an hour ago. Direct starts in 6 minutes, so that's cool. Honestly, I really don't have any predictions. This Direct just feels really weird going into it just because no Smash and all that, but I'm excited. I'd like to see Rhythm Heaven or Mario Kart, but I have very low hopes for either of those. I'm a little bit behind with editing Directs. Here we go. Okay, what's up? What's
Here's
coming?
some news for Mario Kart fans.
Before we continue, we're gonna excuse the unflattering ass angle, okay? Okay.
Many of you have been enjoying the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe game since its launch in 2017. So,
You had me at Mario
we've been
Kart?
working on remastering select courses from across the Mario Kart series, and we'll be releasing them as paid downloadable content.
They're just now doing DLC for this. Better be Waluigi Pinball, though. Coconut Mall. Yep. Sky Garden, yo! You know what? It's not 9, but I'll take this.
Paid DLC courses will be coming to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This is the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. You may recognize
Toad
some
Circuit.
courses from past Mario Kart games.
And they got tour courses in here. That's good.
8 courses will be released at a time over 6 waves.
Jeez, that's so
Additional
much!
courses we plan on releasing.
Okay, so it's basically a new game's worth. Okay, I'll take it.
Such as Coconut Mall, Chateau Mountain,
Oh my god, I'm so glad they're doing this though,
and
just
Tokyo
to...
Blur will be included in the first wave. Of course, you can play these courses locally and online.
I'll take this though.
A Nintendo eShop.
It's not Mario Kart 9, but it's
You can enjoy
literally...
this DLC at no additional cost.
That's a good thing for the expansion pass. That is a very good thing for the expansion pass.
Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass
That
on its
alone,
own.
that actually is a really good thing to add for expansion pass.
How was that? I hope you're looking forward to the additional courses in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. This next segment will be our last announcement. Please take a look.
That's so weird that they're just now doing that, though. I don't know, something tells me it's a really good thing for the expansion pass. So, I just want to give a little post-commentary on that. I'm kind of glad I kind of chilled out on doing the reaction shit, because, like... I gave fucking nothing on that. Pinball, though. Coconut Mall. Okay, yeah, I will say I was definitely both a lot quieter and a lot more repetitive reacting to that than I remembered being. So, honestly, didn't get as much from this as I thought I would. I thought it would be cool to release after years of having the clip of me gasping just like on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok and all that shit. So, yeah, glad to finally have that reaction out there somewhere. Well, bye.